react whenever they heard Martin King was coming into town. It would not be a very pleasant thing.
Combustible bird. No articulated principles concerning women's rights.
I think it was just implied that there was no difference. I mean, Mac and Clarence made no overt statements or talk about women.
Women in the group were just as we were.
I mean, there was certainly no thinking that they must stay in their place at all. I mean, their place was any place they wanted to be.
I loved Cornelia Farms and felt very welcome there. I remember Clarence in this rustic house sitting in a straight chair talking deep theology and of God's great love and the kingdom of God, and the children were crawling all over him, and he never raised his voice. He just loved them and let them come and go. He kept talking. The Cornelia women could not join in this. We were busy working. See, that's been the story of my life. I wanted to sit and listen to what Clarence had to say, but instead I felt obligated to help make, I think it was 60 egg salad sandwiches. Peel the eggs and mash them up, and I didn't want to do it, but I never thought to question them. My husband and the men were talking to Clarence, and I was busy working. Story of my life. The Mary Martha parables in the Bible. I always wanted to be Mary and felt like I always ended up being Martha. When I began Mac's class my junior year, I was already married, and when we were dating, Mercer had lots of rules for girls. We had a 12-inch rule in the parlor in the women's dorm. We could sit on the love seats with the guys, but we had to be 12 inches apart. And one woman actually had a ruler, and she would come and measure. And I remember what happened one day. The guy that wanted to be with me all the time had insisted on going beyond the 12-inch rule by a long shot, and I knew we were going to get caught, and so I started to run out. And just as I did, he grabbed me and he pinned me to the wall. And that woman came by and canvassed me the entire weekend. Couldn't leave my room. She said nothing to him. My boyfriend was very possessive. Showed up everywhere. I couldn't date anybody else. And it got to the point that by the end of the sophomore year, I was either going to leave school, go home, break up, or we'd have to get married. First person we as Southern Baptist girls had sexual impulses for, we believed we should marry. We married the next September. If I had been honest, I felt it was a mistake as I walked down the aisle, but I thought, this is the honorable thing to do. And this is what I must do as a good Baptist girl. I was 19, and Jack started running my life when I was 17. He even had me so that I was giving him my allowance, and he was telling me how to spend it. He was making all my decisions. After we were married, I felt it was my responsibility to keep him happy and keep him at home, and I felt there was no way to do that and not have sex. And I knew if we did that, I would get pregnant, no matter what I was doing. It was a pre-pill generation. It was a very difficult thing. I had my first baby 11 months after we were married, and Mercer's rules were that I could not go to school if I was pregnant, even married. I had to wear a raincoat every day winter quarter to keep people from seeing that I was pregnant. I couldn't keep going to school anyway. I was expected to work to put my husband through graduate school. I had to sacrifice my dreams. All along I was to be gracious. And this is the real crux. It's believing you're supposed to be doing something and be gracious. Spark something here. let me tell you this. It hurts. I was 7.5 months pregnant with my first child, and at some point in one of Mac's weekly meetings, we had sentence prayers, and I began to cry. I was crying because I felt very badly of myself. How could I be such an ingrate and such an immature girl instead of a woman? And I prayed that God would help make me to be accepting and not to be resentful that I could not continue my education. I had never been so stretched. But I could not continue being the kind of person I was in a group of men. Yeah. I had to give it all up. I was a wife and a mother. I had to give up everything for my husband. My life now would be living through my husband and my children, not me. I no longer had a life of my own. I had a tubal ligation after my 4th baby died. It took 10 doctors' signatures plus my husband's to get the surgery. They were all men. I didn't even have rights over my own body.
Mac, what is justice?
You say to your wife, I love you, love you, love you, and you grab her and hug her and throw her up in the air, and before she hits the ground, she says, who gets the car keys? See, you have one car, and that's justice, see. You know, it's very simple. Justice is very simple. All you have to do is ask who gets the car keys.
Combustible burn. 6th principle.
We stand for alternatives to war, iron curtain propaganda, nationalistic patriotism and armaments. This may be the path of all-out pacifism or lesser degrees of variation upon that.
I grew up in a fundamentalist environment. Very traditional. I think I had one session of high school. Because my family was poor, I went to New York when I was 15, got a job in order to feed the family. During World War II, I was a tool maker with Grumman Aircraft out in Long Island. We made carrier-based planes, and I don't know what happened. One day, I'm working at my bench, and suddenly everything comes to life. Now, here I am working in a shop, machinery going, people are hammering, and all sorts of things are going on, and suddenly everything stops for me. And I'm overcome with guilt. Here I am, making an instrument that will kill people and destroy God's creation. I don't know what to do. I am overcome by it. And, well, I sort of made a vow. I said, well, the first chance I get, I want to help people, not destroy people. Why it happened, I have no reason for it. None at all. It came. And it stayed with me until after the war was over. I couldn't shake it off.
Einar got a job teaching at a black college here in Macon.
I taught at a Negro college, the Georgia Baptist Junior College in Macon over on Great Highway.
Just now deceased, see. That college was set up deliberately to evade Mercer's desegregation. The buildings were so run down that our koinonia group would go over on weekends and repair them.
There were very few buildings, dilapidated buildings. The only equipment we saw in the science classroom was almost a toy microscope. The books were all old, the yard seemed to be bare.
I was on the faculty there, and my salary came from the Southern Baptist Convention, which was what?
My heart was just heavy. Really, it hurt to go there and see what those kids had and what we had.
I spoke at a white church on Mother's Day. I spoke about segregation using the scriptures, both the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, showing that segregation shouldn't exist. I felt compelled to speak to this situation. And they didn't like what I said. They wrote to the Georgia Baptist Convention.
And the Board of Trustees made up of Baptist members in Macon. You know, bankers, lawyers, all white. They heard what Einar was doing, and they came down and said, "You're fired," just like that, said, "You're fired."
I discontinued my salary. Gee, I was shocked. Really, that they would do this.
And one of the saddest sights I've ever seen was the night Einar came to our house in a rented trailer with his 3 kids and all of his household goods. He was telling us goodbye, crying, all sad. They expected to spend their whole lives in Georgia. He was exiled. Told there's no place for you around here.
We only had 2 black schools in town. And you guys had lots of schools. We were proud. We had the biggest classes going into the gym. 6. Can you imagine how much you're going to learn? Our books were old and ragged.
One day I was walking around behind my high school and I saw a truck, sort of a pickup-sized truck, you know, and there were loads of old tattered books on it. And I thought they were taking them to the dump, but they said, "Oh no, we're taking them over to the nigger school." And I knew that I'd helped wear out those books, and I couldn't see how they would be worth anything to anybody, even a dog, you know, or whatever.
And now I know when I used to open my books when I went to the black school, they'd be raggedy and there'd be name, scratched through. So that meant that that book had been passed down so many times that by the time it got to me, there was nowhere to write your name.
The majority of students at Mercer were not bright eyes. This is something you need to keep in mind. Take a term from the Hebrew Bible, these students were a remnant. I'm talking 5% of student bodies operate that way. I'll give you an example. It was 1960, and there was an occurrence at Tattle Square Park. Just across from Willingham over there, about a stone's throw from this theater. As I remember rightly, what had happened was some little black kids that wandered into T Square Park, preschool, little tots. And some white man was enraged about this. Black were banned from the park. Well, I don't know who called him, but here come the police. And so Bill Randall and Lewis Wynn, both African Americans, go over into the park to try to get the kids out of the park to protect them. And some white man went out there and he stabbed Lewis. Right there. Now, the thing you need to keep in mind about this is that from Tattle Square Church all the way down to the corner were Muslim students lined up cheering this white man that stabbed Lewis. Well, Lewis had a whole bunch of stitches put in, but he was a World War II veteran. He wasn't a stranger to combat.